The good old days. The good old days. The good old days. When, well, it's like Toys R Us's greatest tagline ever. Maybe the second greatest tagline of all time behind Nike, where a kid can be a kid. You know? Is it Toys R Us?
Not anymore, man. Those days are gone.
No, it's still around. Okay, just like Circuit City. There's a rebound for every company.
Is Circuit City coming back?
I don't think it went away. I think it's online. I think Tiger Direct bought it or something like that.
Huh. I don't know.
I think if you go to
Richmond-based
circuitcity.com, I think if you go to circuitcity.com, it still lives. What's going on, man?
I don't know. Dude, I don't know. Just as the world turns, right? Episode 255.
Did you have any good April Fool's Day jokes? I mean, I feel like I fooled a couple people.
No.
Nothing.
It's crazy. I had a pretty busy April 1st, and through all the people that I talked to, no one mentioned anything. Mm-hmm. But then I got, once I got home, jumped on X, scrolled through, and I'm like, dude, I cannot be on X today because like this is just everything. You don't know what you can believe and what you can't believe. And based on the current situation of the world, half the stuff is unbelievable anyway. So I was like, dude, I'll come back tomorrow.
I got at least two people. I told people that I was writing my third book. What are you watching on Hulu? Put out a new cover with the Netflix crossed out, the Hulu logo. Got a couple of text messages about that the day after. And I was like, oh, yes, it worked.
Yeah.
I put a link to the old book on there, the Netflix book. I haven't looked at sales for that day, but it'd be funny if I sold some books that day.
That would be a nice little growth hack for you.
Yeah. Lie, kids. You want to succeed in business, just lie. Make April Fool's Day every single day. And you will see the utmost growth. So this is going to be a fun episode because we say this, and most of the time, I would think 90% of the time, at least one of us knows the guest.
Correct.
This time, neither of us know today's guest. And he's in a secluded room in a location that we cannot, undisclosed location that I've never seen before. Looks pretty awesome. But so this is literally going to be like us at a coffee shop meeting for the first time and have a little conversation backstage. We've already gotten into some fun stuff. Probably won't talk about that here. But, the suspense of that tease that will never be told on.
Well, most people would just jump in and be like, "Hey, Nate, welcome to the show. What is it that you do for a living?" But I think we're going to start with like, what are you watching on Netflix, Nate?
Oh man, I don't even know. I'm not like super like watcher of things just to watch them. I feel like there's an oversaturation of shows. Things that are not done with intention, they're just kind of done. Man, so Netflix.
We all would agree with that.
What have I watched? I don't know. What have I watched on Netflix? I've been rewatching old stuff, not necessarily maybe on Netflix.
Okay,
just rewatched The Wire.
Okay, I watched that once. Pretty darn good show. I can understand why that's a lot of people's favorite show.
Yeah, it ranks high.
I think it's better than Sopranos. Second time through that one.
I think Sopranos is pretty overrated, but I'm not into that kind of stuff.
I get what you're saying though. Like when it came out, I think like it was what it was, but like how is it aged and things like that, So we can think about like that.
HBO, now Max, I think, whatever the hell it's called these days. Don't know why they would change, but they seem to have very good intentional shows.
Yeah, we're watching White Orchid right now.
White Lotus.
Or White Lotus. Yeah. And that show is so bizarre, but man, it captures my attention. And it just we dig it.
That's a good way to describe it. too. Like bizarre and captures your attention.
Yeah,
It's
man.
really
Like,
just a rinse and repeat, right? Like murder mystery. We're gonna show you how screwed up all these rich people are and like what stereotypes they kind of meet.
That's a
And then we'll
show
do it again.
that's every season's different show,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Same kind of
The
concept, but yeah, like rinse and repeat. But like, yeah, season 3, they're in Thailand this season, and there were a couple, 2 other places the 2 previous seasons.
But
yeah, like
different cast every year.
So the White Lotus Hotel is really like your character. Like that's the kind of reoccurring character in the sense of like, all objects are things, I guess. Can be characters. And then I think in this 3rd season there's a couple characters from the 1st season that have
Okay.
been like pulled in. So there's interconnections for
Yeah.
sure. I think that's what kind of keeps it fun.
The best show I've seen recently in the year is a show that most people haven't heard of. It's called From, From. It's on a platform that no one's ever heard of, MGM Plus, which, by the way, I don't know if you knew this, but I learned this a couple months ago. MGM, the casino, is not the same thing as MGM, the studios. They are 2 separate entities, yet they have the same name. Who knew? Because I was just like, it's just so weird, but that's a show that many people haven't heard about. But it's kind of like Lost meets zombies, and I'm not necessarily a zombie kind of guy, but it's just a hint of zombies.
Okay.
So if you liked Lost and you want, it's a faster Lost, I would say.
Okay.
So we'll see.
I enjoyed Lost. I didn't like the last episode. It felt like cop out, but yeah, it's that's me. The last episode felt like what they would have done if they would have ended it in the 1st season, and I didn't get any resolution about the island, which I felt was ultimately the main character of the show, and I didn't ultimately came to the point where I didn't really care about the characters as much as like, what was this indigenous race that was there, and like what were they doing? And like I wanted to know so much more about like the island as a character than I think I did about like Jack or any of those other folks.
I like closure. When you end a series, there needs to be closure, and there was lack of that.
I like a little abstraction, but it was still, I just felt, I don't know, I didn't feel like I got my money's worth from all the time I invested in the show.
Lost, where does that rank for you? 2?
Probably 2. I think Breaking Bad would be 1. Lost was it for a long time, and then the reason Breaking Bad was not only was it a good show, but it was like I never wanted to turn it off. I feel like there's parts of Lost that you want to turn off. You're like, okay, like this is an unnecessary episode here. Where are we going with this? There was a whole season like that. The Sideways season. I think that's season 5. I think that season is interesting because you're seeing a different world and how they could potentially get there, the pendulum swing thing. I haven't watched that in a while. I thought about rewatching it again at some point, but I decided that 132 episodes in 60 minutes wasn't what I wanted to do, so I didn't.
I thought about rewatching Lost myself, and
I think I watched like 5 minutes, and I was like, okay, I don't need to do this.
Yeah, it is interesting how you can go back and watch something that was so great, but then when you go back, you're like, not as good as I remembered.
They say this about The Office, right? I still that would be my number 3 show. They're like, we can't make this show now because it's so raunchy.
Oh,
and it's quite funny. It is.
Yeah.
If you've never seen it, Nate, like it's definitely
Took me a while to open up to it because of the British version. I'd watched the British version years and years before we had Steve Carell version, but
Gervais, is that what it is?
Yeah,
Ricky
Gervais.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed it. It definitely like humor that sticks with you too. Right?
Yeah. So let's talk about some interesting things about you first, just because we'll get into the business stuff. Obviously, that's the business show. But there's some mindset things that I think are really interesting. And as I'm reading your kind of notes that you've helped us with, there's some pieces in there that I think are really cool. So 4:30 wake up, a meditation and grounding thing. Are you like get outside, touch the earth type of grounding? Do you buy one of those mats? Like, walk us through all of these things, because you hear a lot of these like health gurus that come up with like their 17 steps, and it's like, okay, like I'm sure somewhere in there's a thing, but walk us through how you kind of figured this out, what it is, how it helps, etc.
Something I found that I did in college is I would get up and I would read every morning before doing anything else, and it was personal reading, like whether it was magazine, whether it was just a book. It wasn't school related, and like that was basically because I never knew what the day would entail with architecture school. You never knew, like you could lose 20 hours just boom in the studio time. And so doing that, like that helped me just like be in a mental state where like I did something for myself today, whether or not I get to do anything else that's for me, I got to do this. So like I always kind of had this sort of thing that I did. And I like to get up early and go for walks and things like that. It was I read this book, The 5 a.m. Club. There's some good info in it, but it could probably be about 10 pages. There's like this weird story that they tried to tie in. It doesn't really make any sense. It makes it kind of difficult to read in my opinion. But he talks about in that book is like every morning you dedicate like 20 minutes to exercise, 20 minutes to reading nonfiction, and 20 minutes to like quiet contemplation. And so that's when I started adding in more of the meditation. I was doing it previously when I would get to the office, and that was pre-Orbis, pre our own company. I would get to the office and do it, but then people might knock on your door. It was disruptive. So it was like, let me do that first. Let me start my day here. And like you asked, outside, I like to go outside. Sometimes I'll go for walks at 4:30, 5 a.m. Just, kind of clear your head, start your day with that clear head moment. But I don't like going for walks when it's cold. So I hadn't been doing too much of that lately. No grounding mats or anything like that. I haven't tried any of those. Don't know. You read about them.
Seems like a fad. It can't.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
Tim is a big runner. He's run like 15,000 days in a row, at least like 5 miles. He gets out there. He don't care about the cold. He doesn't like the cold. But
well, I don't like the cold. But dude, it was, boy, was it warm and humid this morning. Good night.
Yeah.
Where did this come from?
I would never ever call myself a runner, but I don't mind doing a little bit every now and then.
Yeah, it's like you. I mean, it just allows me to set my day, get my mind right. Typically listen to a book or listen to a podcast. Try to always surround myself around people that are smarter than me, so I can try to learn a thing or two. And yeah, I totally agree with you in this. Like if it doesn't happen first thing in the morning, like the weight of the day just continues to crushes me, and then I get cranky, and then so I have to do it first thing in the morning.
I feel like you also have a lot less excuses to say no, which is maybe even the biggest thing of that.
Yeah.
On that early stuff. So, Tim, have you read that book, The 5 a.m. Club?
No, I haven't. But is it good?
I can't remember when I read it. Oh, it's 11 hours long audio. Wow, I don't remember it being that long. I remember it being good, but like you said, maybe 10 pages, right? So like, but maybe that's a good thing, right? Where sometimes it's like reinforcing some of those aspects of it in there. But I heard something a long time ago, and it was like, spend the $15 on a book and get at least a nugget out of it and implement that nugget. If you can't do that, then none of these things are worth it, right? And so obviously it worked for you. Did you read or did you listen to it? Like, how do you?
I read mostly.
Okay.
Occasionally might listen to a book, but I'm like 30 to 40, 50 books a year. and it's kind of all over the map with that.
You buy them? Do you go to Slover? Like, how do you do that?
Yeah, I usually buy things. I reread a lot of things too. Big into like art and architecture books in general, just like well-made books, books as like product and art in and of themselves. And so have a lot of those types of things. We have developed sort of, we call the Orbis library, which is kind of our art and architecture reference library. That's just been important to me, sort of fell back in love with reading in college. I'd read a lot in like middle school and things, kind of got away from it with high school. Had when I was a freshman, I had a fifth year architecture student hand me a Kurt Vonnegut book, Cat's Cradle. And I read that. I gave it back to him the next day.
Wow.
And then I proceeded to read like all the Kurt Vonnegut books in a row. And that sort of kind of got me back engaged. And then I just look at like you said, like if there's going to be something I'm going to take away from everything, right? Like that's the goal. Like look at everything as a learning opportunity. And like there are some good things to take away from the 5 a.m. club, and there were some things that were silly, like these characters that they made that the author made up to kind of like help sell the story. But if you think about it in a sense of like, maybe it's for people that don't really read a lot of books, maybe it needs to, in a way, try to engage people and draw them in and get them interested in reading, in general.
So you had mentioned the Orbis library. What is Orbis?
Oh, Orbis. Okay. Orbis is our landscape architecture firm. Orbis Landscape Architecture. We were founded in 2020 in the midst of the pandemic. Orbis is Latin for basically round. Orbis terrarum is Latin for the world, and in that sense it means the. Orbis kind of functions as the word the, and I could be completely wrong because I haven't taken Latin, but this is what I learned from the internet. So we look at it as like Orbis is like the world, or Orbis is like the landscape architects in the sense. In landscape architecture, when we specify plants, we specify them in Latin. So that's sort of where the Latin kind of came from, using that in our name. And I kid you not, a lot of it is based on the fact that during the pandemic, we were working for a civil engineering company. We had created this thing called Orbis Terrarum, which was essentially us doing charrettes to keep our minds active and creative during the pandemic. And in May of 2020, I was found out that my business partner, Ariel, who was just working for me at the time, was going to be laid off. So we requested that they lay us both off and dissolve the landscape architecture department at that firm, let us go out on our own. And so in 7 days, Ariel had built our website and gotten our LLC set up and everything. And we just went with Orbis because we already had the name. It was just seemed to fit.
I dig the sense of urgency in this. It's amazing how much you can get done when that sense of urgency is there.
Oh yeah, man. 30,000 emails I had to go back through to make sure there wasn't anything that needed to come with us, because with them dissolving that department, they basically told us you can take all the work that's on the books. We don't know who we might hire as a consultant moving forward. We still do a bit of work with that firm, but it's allowed us to grow in a way where we can now target people that we're inspired by and that we want to work with, that I wouldn't have had that opportunity at the past firm.
And that was based in Vibe District, Virginia Beach?
No, it's off of Witch Duck Road.
Okay.
Civil engineering firm over near the Jewish Community Center off of Witch Duck. So our parking lot was pretty much right next to the on-ramp. So I could drive to Town Center, which was like a mile away, or the ocean front in just about the same amount of time. If you think about like beach traffic and stuff. And so I would just go down there as kind of my daily break, um, get away. That was in at kind of the beginnings of the Vibe District, like 2016-ish. Um, Going down there, building relationships with business owners and things like that. And that led us to doing the first kind of Three Ships. So Three Ships Coffee was in a small little space, and they had to move to their current location on 19th Street behind WRV. And the owner was like, "Hey, man, we don't have a lot of money, but we really want to do an outdoor space. How can we do it?" And so I consider that kind of like our first Orbis project, even though there was no Orbis at that time. And I don't even think Ariel was working for me at the time. She was probably still in college. So it was just me and Brad Ewing, who owns Three Ships. We drew the design on the asphalt out front with chalk, made a recording of that in a notebook. He had wood that he had basically gone through the debris pile of every time they tore down a house in Shadow Lawn, and just collected the old wood and saved it. That's what he built out the interior of that shop with, as well as our first round of sort of outdoor space. It's on like its third evolution now. Brad is pretty much wants to be a landscape architect himself, and he likes to build outdoor spaces, and he does a great job at it. But for that one, we didn't even have money to buy plants. So WRV is their landlord. They gave us permission to dig up things in their parking lot and repurpose. So all the original landscape and even some of the grasses and other plants that are planted at their other two locations all came from that original sort of like we called it guerrilla landscaping. You could call it stealing with permission. Uh, but that's
Inspiration.
sort of that's sort of how we started. We've since done a bunch of other little things in the Vibe District. Our probably favorite project down there is there's a small butterfly garden that we did again with Brad from Three Ships and 50 or so members of the community. We built a butterfly garden in undeveloped alley that's down there behind Java Surf. It it's recorded on paper. It's City of Virginia Beach property, but it's never going to be paved, or at least it never has been paved. It was a grass space behind an apartment complex, and we were like, hey, what can we do here? Got the city involved. So it's pretty cool. It's like a full cycle thing where the jailhouse workforce came out and they did some of the initial like prepping of the landscape beds and things like that. The city landscape department, Parks and Rec, they worked on it some. Like I said, we had 50 or so volunteers from the community come out for planting day, and we've continued to have people donate plants that go in the space. There's now a nonprofit group that's kind of taken over the space, and they're helping to maintain it. And so it's sort of like checks all those great boxes of like what can happen when you can get the community engaged in like a project and like let them make it their own.
How does landscape architecture, how does that evolve over time? Like, can you take us through like the evolution, like how it's interesting to me because it just seems like it would be something that's very steady state, but
Yeah. So landscape architecture essentially is the design of everything outside of the building. That's kind of the best way to describe it. It can be as simple as like, where are the sidewalks, where are the parking lot, how does the building fit on the site, to like these very innovative things you might see in contemporary parks, from like water features to capturing stormwater, diverting it into stream beds, daylighting streams, things like that. So that's sort of like big, broad landscape architecture. So in America, we look at Central Park as kind of like the first landscape architecture project, although it's probably not. But Frederick Law Olmsted, designer of Central Park with Calvert Vaux. He's kind of the first person to call himself a landscape architect. So in that sense, they were copying like Hudson River style paintings, right? These pastoral landscapes. You can actually relate them back to Claude Lorrain, who was painting, he was a French painter in like, I want to say like 16th century, where you'd have like very idyllic nature, um, maybe some artifacts, maybe some constructed like ruins, different things like that. The idea being the lungs of the city, right? Like a place for all people. Um, Little known about Olmsted is like during the time he was doing the park, and before that he was also a journalist, and he actually toured the South during slavery and was one of the only people that was writing about the conditions of slavery when it was happening. And he was doing it anonymously. He was sending his stuff back to a paper in New York, what ultimately became the New York Times. And so like he was experiencing human conditions in a way that, no one else was really talking about or writing about. So I like to think that that influenced his design as well. There's a great practitioner out in Harlem, and she teaches at Harvard, and she's researching this like way deep. And so some of my info is coming from her lectures. Her name's Sarah Zodi, super talented. But just thinking about like these spaces for all people, and then you have landscape architecture in the very private sense of like high-end private residential gardens that are very exclusive, right? So there's been sort of that era. There's the era of like modernism and suburban sprawl and all of these things that kind of had very sterile landscapes. You think about just your boxwood shrubs, and they're always pruned to the same size, and your green lawn, and it's always the same. And there's just this inherent sameness of this monoculture that doesn't serve anything to nature, to really to people even. And so now we're in this kind of evolution where everything is supposed to be native, or everyone wants to use the terms native plants, and we want to design in a more naturalized style. We think about designing not just for people but for animals and wildlife, and other users like that. Climate change has become a big thing that we talk about a lot in design, or that some people talk about a lot in landscape architecture and design, and how we are addressing that. I feel like as landscape architects, we've always kind of been trained to think that way and think in those innovative ways that address these sort of climate issues we're facing now. Um, so making that the big talking point of our national organization may not, in my opinion, be like our greatest thing, but that's what they want to do, and we can support that. So I don't know if I answered your question or not. I definitely rambled
No,
a
it's
lot.
just it definitely is. It's one of those things. There's a lot more. It's so much more intentional than what a lot of people I think give it. Not necessarily. I don't know if credit is the right word, but there's a lot of intention behind it. And I think it's just funny, like me being an amateur at best, but I think a lot of people, they travel somewhere, they get inspired because they see something, they come back to their home, they want to replicate the same thing, and it's just like, man, it's not meant to be like that. Or like animals and deer or whatever, they'll come and they'll just eat everything up because that's food for them, and you're just, yeah, so it's super interesting.
And there's this really interconnectedness of everything, and I think that's really where we're getting in design. And like you say, like I can do a great landscape and the deer can completely destroy it. So like in that sense of placemaking, like I have to think about what are deer resistant plants, and
Right.
they still eat the ones that are on the deer resistant list anyway. But we, in the interconnectedness as people, as humans, we've encroached so much on their habitats that like, can we really get too pissed off at them for encroaching on our habitats? Right. So, maybe it's not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe you can plant something at the edge of your property, at the edge of your woods, that is more of a food source for them, that keeps them less from coming into your yard, right? So it's just like thinking more like holistically about that, instead of just being like, these were the cheapest plants at the nursery, so this is what we planted.
Yeah, well, that's what I do.
Okay.
So I feel like I can't remember the time frame. 2015, 2018. The city of Norfolk gets this Rockefeller grant, which I believe actually becomes the RISE thing that Paul, I can't think, he's in assembly, does.
Yeah.
And if I recall, in this, it was all about sea level rise. And so it's interesting to hear you articulate all this stuff and then be in an area that has been, let's just say, damaged by so much cement that actually impacts the sea level aspect of it. And the answer is more green, right? So the answer isn't necessarily like, what are those things in LA where like they have like they create their own little river and like
the easements type things,
like spillways.
So right, so that's not. It's the answer is not something like that. The answer is like you have to create these more green spaces so that the water can, I guess, go into the ground, do whatever, etc. Obviously, I don't know the terminology, but doing what you do and then thinking about we're in an area that is like pretty damn low and it floods a lot. Like, how do you incorporate that into, okay, well, we're fine right now because I'm here, but it's not high tide. Like literally, 100 yards that way where I live, there's a river that for no reason to the naked eye, it just floods literally up to people's houses. Right. And that's like 6-7 feet high. And it's this very small creek that's back there, but it gets obnoxious. It's like, so how do you incorporate that kind of stuff into it, knowing that we live in an area that's so, you just don't know?
I love it. Great question. So Norfolk, in and of itself, you see all the flood maps. Paul's group they've got all these interactive flood maps they've developed. If you look at those flood maps and you look at them compared to a map from 1800 of Norfolk, all those areas were creeks and waterways. So we have filled. If you're familiar with Ghent, the Ghent neighborhood, historic Ghent, that was all Smith's Creek. That was water and marsh, and there was some farmland over there, but they just filled it all in to build. And that's all over the city. So like, we don't have anywhere for the water to go. So we have the water that comes in associated with sea level rise. We have, the concept of sinking. Norfolk is sinking a little bit. And then, we also have like, where does the water go that is falling on the surfaces and on all these surfaces? So that idea of creating more green spaces, there's this popular concept now, sponge cities, where you're essentially creating places for that water to go, intentionally creating those places. Now, it's a whole nother like level of difficulty to when you start talking about, oh, well, we don't necessarily have to have these places. They're not required by the stormwater design for this project. So that's just an added cost. And now we don't want to do it because it's just going to cost extra and it's going to affect our bottom line and our contractor profits and all of that. So sometimes we lose those things from the projects, but those are the things that are going to help us as a city, as a culture, by coming up with more innovative solutions to manage these things, because these issues aren't going to just magically go away. They are going to be things we have to address. There's a very contentious flood wall project right now that the Army Corps has presented, that encompasses some of the Freemason district. 16-foot high flood walls, like how is that going to affect people's properties and views and things like that? But that's keeping water out. What about the water that's in? Where is that going to go? You
Well,
know,
not to mention what's literally across the highway, or, you know, the waterway, Portsmouth. What does that do to there?
That's a great question. I've asked that question, being from Portsmouth, and
You know what's
it's
I
not
didn't
being
know
talked
that.
about.
Yeah, because people don't care about over there, just like they don't care it. Whatever. I'm being facetious. I did not know that about the rivers and creeks that they just built on
Oh,
top
dude,
of. That's wild.
filled.
Have you ever seen like the old school pictures? So like where Waterside is, or like where Main Street is in downtown, that was all man-made. So they filled in there. So like where my office used to be, basically right across the street from Hell's Kitchen. And my understanding is that the corner of there off to where Waterside is, that was all built up so that they could have another street there. And so that's crazy. But it doesn't flood a lot there, which is interesting. Even though they're right at the water. I'm sure there's a reason behind it. But this is very fascinating because, well, my favorite thing about the floods, though, is the idiots who then drive under the underpasses. It's like, come on, guys. Like, duh. Like, of course, like, you can look in there and, oh, God, it's hilarious. And, yeah. Have you ever been in the flood in Ghent, Tim? You ever had to drive through one of them?
Not while it was flooded, but I've seen the video footage.
So, Nate, I used to work in TV news for about 3 years. And I worked at a TV station that's right by The Hague. And so it doesn't matter. It just floods, right? I think they called it Lake Olney, right? Because they knew it was just going to flood. Like it could be just a random day. And that thing, I mean, it got... Actually, I made the front page of the paper because I drove my Jeep Wrangler through it because I thought it was funny. And it was probably 4 feet tall. Like, I mean, it's just be a random day. That thing just, it's...
Yeah. So that area there, right at the corner there of Olney and can't think of the other cross
where the
street.
the Exxon is?
Where the 7-Eleven is, right?
Yeah.
So that area is one of the worst flooded. That's that Lake Olney area, right? So the biggest stormwater pipes in the city of Norfolk go underneath the Chrysler Museum. Underneath, you can access them through the basement. And that's where that water is backing up because there's nowhere for it to go. It goes into the Hague. Well, when the Hague's full and the Hague's already overflowing its banks, that water's not going anywhere. And that can flood at high tide sometimes, right? It might not even be raining. It's just that water gets pushed back up. They just built a new apartment there. So that'll be interesting to see what goes on.
But that's true. A lot of the worst ones are not rain related, and I don't think people realize that. I mean, it's just that's like the street by my house. It's just like my mom's like, "Well, did it rain?" I'm like, "No, it's never about rain. It just magically is like, phew."
Wind blows the right way. We have
the moons,
king tide,
something to do with the moons or something.
The moons and the tides. So it's pretty wild to think about that. We assume that like this isn't going to happen, right? Like this didn't used to happen. I disagree. We've seen photos from the 20s of flooding in Norfolk and things like that. So I think it's just something people have always lived with. But we don't think about it because we have such a turnover, right? Like we have a lot of military, we have a lot of people that stay here after they retire from the military. So it might just be that like, oh my God, this flooding's gotten so much worse. I think it just we've always flooded. I mean, has it gotten worse? Probably. We keep building, right? We keep building. That's the unfortunate aspects of what we do as architects is we keep building. And so now it's not up to us entirely because there's so many collaborators and big pictures and things like that. But we need to think about innovative and creative solutions to these things because they're not going to get better. Not right now, especially in whatever this climate is, ever evolving, moving target of our federal government.
So what's the answer? Like, is it to plant a whole bunch of water absorbing trees and landscape, or create a lot of
I think we need more
lakes?
wetlands. I think we need more wetlands. I think wetlands help with flooding. Where do we put them? I don't know.
Yeah, it's
You know,
tough.
there's not a lot of capitalism involved with taking an old built site and converting it into back to nature.
Yeah, not a
You
lot of
know, no
tax revenue
one's
generated.
yeah, no one's really profiting off of that. So it is,
But
I
how
think
much are you losing on the aspect of that because of other, like, I wonder if we've looked at it from that perspective where it's like from a emergency perspective, or I don't even know how, so many different aspects, having to close a business, people not being able to get somewhere. I wonder if there's a number that's even remotely close to pushing back at that and saying, well, yes, but this is causing a bigger issue than you think. And then to your point about, I think it's always been flooding. My pushback is always on, no matter what. Like, what's the context of this? Show me the historical data so that we can look at the new stuff and be like, okay, like actually, like these are the same. You just aren't remembering that last year looked like that, 10 years ago didn't look like that. You just forgot about that in the last 365, 5 years, 10 years, whatever. But it hasn't really changed. And I love that aspect that you said, because I think that's a big missing piece in just the world where we're just like, oh, this stuff's all new. And it's like, well, we have data. Let the data tell you if that's new or not, because who knows? And if it is, then let's fix it. If it's not, I mean, maybe we still need to fix it, but at least have a real, with context understanding, this is where we sit.
Yeah. I mean, I think I recently read a book on Ghent, on the neighborhood, and
Really?
someone in
Name?
there's a what's that?
What's the name?
Oh man, I'll look it up while we're on here and get it for you. Um, but there's a reference in it from, I want to say, the 50s, where someone who was already studying that the neighborhood was sinking. So 70 years ago, um, maybe more.
Hmm.
Let's see if I can find this easily. It's an interesting book for sure.
You don't hear a lot of books about Ghent
Right.
specifically. That's what I was like, well. So
Yeah,
do you get a lot of flooding, Tim, in Yorktown?
No, but the thing that's interesting, as we're talking about this, I'm just thinking about how Pocosin continues to get built up and built up, and I mean that's just
Oh,
like
because it's
Ghent
on
was
stilts, right?
always. I think Pocosin is an Indian word for like swamp or something like that. So yeah, again, that water has to go somewhere.
Huh.
So the book is Ghent, John Graham's Dream. Um, John Graham was a civil engineer, so there we go. There wasn't even a landscape architect involved. It was it was all civil engineering, and you know they know the water goes in a hole, it goes in a pipe, it goes out, and they do a lot of infrastructure stuff, you know. But it's interesting. Ghent is an interesting neighborhood. I've you know we're working on a project for Maury High School. This big new Maury High School project, and I've done a few other projects in Ghent, which have kind of led me to like deep dive research in the history of Ghent. When they were filling in Smith's Creek. So if we think about the Hague, the Hague is shaped kind of like a bow. Each of those ends continued up as creeks, and they met almost in a wetland where Maury High School is, more or less. So all of that was filled, right? And so we start thinking about these things and thinking about that flooding and thinking about that history and those stories, right? Like for us, we like to tell the stories of the site in our designs, and we like to mine for history. And so when the Hague was being filled in, there were some people that were opposed to it. The only people were really opposed to it were the oyster houses. So this is where you had the oystermen, you had the shucking, the canning, things like that that were happening went back when the Elizabeth River had oysters in it, before we destroyed all that, right? And so these were kind of marginalized people. They were likely Black people. Haven't gotten too deep into that history, but basically they used the health department to come in and shut them all down so they could fill in the creeks to build the neighborhood, right? So how these stories play out and how they get
100 years
lost.
later.
Yeah, and how they get lost in time.
Right.
That's sort of a big thing in our approach, in Orbis's approach, is like telling the stories of the site, right? Like before Smith's Creek was filled in at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, how many hundreds and thousands of years of history did it have before that? Like Chesapeake tribe, the Chesapeake people that were here, that John Smith interacted with, were different from the Chesapeake people that were here when the Roanoke colonists arrived in the 1580s, and that they interacted with, because Chief Powhatan had wiped out that version of the Chesapeake tribe, because one of his priests told him that a tribe from the Chesapeake region would wipe out his empire. Now, does that have to do with the fact that they had already met the English and that Chesapeake tribe may have had interconnectedness there? And who knows, right? But we have so many of these stories that our lands can tell. So we try to pull those out, right? And tie them in through, whether it's like incorporating patterns into the pavement or into the planting design, or, creating outdoor spaces with seating arrangements that might create a disorienting feeling that can represent someone's story. So we look at like every site as like what was here in the past, and like how can we mine for that, and then how can we apply that to like what this is going to be in the future. And so we think about that environmentally, we think about that culturally, and then there's always the fight of the financial implications of telling these stories, when not everyone maybe is focused on that as we are. But
very fascinating.
It is.
Yeah.
And one of the things that stands out to me is every time I'm going through the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, I'm like, man, all the houses on Willoughby Spit, I'm like, that was formed because of a hurricane, and I can't help but think that could be wiped out also because of a hurricane. I don't know. It's
this area has never been hit with an actual, at the time, numbered storm. It's a storm. It's been a named storm that has been a numbered, but never actually hit dead on as it was a number. It's my understanding of that.
We owe
that's
a lot
a really
to North
freaky.
Carolina.
Yeah, that's a real freaky number real freaky thing to think about. It's like, okay, so
it's mostly been like that because we know from the history of the Roanoke colony down in the Lost Colony, right, in North Carolina. Part of why they could not get back to them was because of the storms. There's always you hear stories of these storms down there, North Carolina, and I mean, we get remnants of them, right? But it must be something about that shape and how that land sticks out.
Thank you, North Carolina. Come on and raise up. Okay, so you're connected with, I think, like the top dogs in the region for stuff like this. And it seems like when you were working at a company less than a decade ago, you started the company, during the heart of COVID. Like, a lot of people talk about how networking and meeting new people is a challenge, but you seem to be able to just get up there and communicate with people. What's your secret sauce on that? Like, do you have an icebreaker question? Like, how do you get in front of these people? Because is it just you're not afraid? This. Like how do you do it?
Fits in so perfect. Next week, I'm giving a presentation in Virginia Tech on community engagement, and so I look at there's a traditional community engagement, and then there's an untraditional community engagement. You need both of them for projects, but I'm going to go on this untraditional approach. So when we started our company, we worked in coffee shops. You meet so many people in coffee shops. You just talk to people, and if it's everyone's got 5 or 10 minutes when they're getting a cup of coffee. You see them; they're just waiting. They're looking at their phone. So if it's someone you know or someone you may want to meet, go up and just introduce yourself, right? Like, I'm pretty introverted, um, for the most part, but if we're talking about landscape architecture, talking about architecture, we're talking about design, we're talking about things that I might be interested in, I can just go, right, and go. And so I say that what gave me the confidence and gave us the confidence to start the business was that we knew so many people, so many different business owners. And like, kid you not, I went in 3 ships over and over and over again. That's how I started talking to the owner. Um, he's like, "Oh man, landscape architecture, that's what I wanted to do. I thought about doing that." And he's like, "Oh, you're from Portsmouth. I got a friend who just married a girl and like they live in Portsmouth." "Oh yeah, who is that?" "Oh, I know her. I know him." Now, boom, Hampton Roads, small town Hampton Roads, man. There's like 3 degrees of separation from just about everybody. And so like building connections that way, telling someone that you're inspired by their work, like, I know what your work is. It's really great. Like, this is what I do. I'd love to find a way for us to collaborate. And like, that's really how I go about it. Like I got hooked up with you guys through like Emmanuel, and him and I were just talking in assembly about like drawing on, he was like doing doodles on his phone. We got to talking about drawing, and like that led to me like talking to him a little bit about what we do and our storytelling. And he was like, "Hey, you want to do this podcast?" So that's sort of how we ended up here.
I appreciate that so much. It's Dieg's at the bottom of Maine and Granby. Have I ever told you this story, Tim, of how I met Phil Decker from Dieg?
Yeah, it's been a while. I could not repeat it.
It's like 2012 time frame. Had moved into Hatch, which was catty corner basically, right there. It's when the plot was downtown.
Yeah. Well, I worked on some of that too.
Okay, so maybe that's where I've seen you before. But well, downtown, like on Granby Street, Main Street,
where the main is.
Yeah. So for 6 months, let's say, I would go into Dieg and I would just wait for exactly what you just said to happen, right? Just wait for someone to come, like Phil Decker, who I wanted to meet. I would just wait for him to do that. That didn't happen. Then one day, I guess he makes face and sees it, and it's like, "Oh, I just read your article in the paper." And I'm like, I've been waiting for so long for this conversation to happen because I'm being a wuss by not going up to you and just being like, "Hey," we ended up becoming great friends. But it's crazy how, and I think people don't think I'm an extrovert, or people think I'm definitely extroverted. I think I have a lot more introverted tendencies than people realize. So I'm not always one to just go up to someone and say hello. But it's just like, if you want an action to happen, you have to like create that action. And I love what you said there, Nate, because it's like, I'm sitting here in this coffee shop waiting for this thing to happen, but I don't have the courage to do it. And I mean, I basically given up on the situation. And then finally it happened because he did it. It's just crazy how like you have, and that became a great friendship out of there, and probably a little bit of business out of that and all of that. And so it's just like, you can't be afraid, because the worst thing that's going to happen is already happening. And that's, you don't know the person. But what happens if that relationship's created because you had one little inkling of courage to just be like, "Hey, how are you?" And the way that I tell people, I teach and coach people to do this now is like, go to the grocery store and say hi to everyone. Go on a walk and say hi to everyone, because what you're going to realize is not everyone's going to say hi back. So you've already realized that negative interaction is just becoming the norm. But when someone does say hi back, you're like, "Oh, hey, that's cool. Like, I appreciate that." Say hi to your neighbors. Like it becomes this routine, and it's do it in your normal days, and then don't look at it from a business perspective.
Well, you know how much I wave when I run, Zach. You experience that.
Obnoxious.
But yeah, I joke to myself, man, like around the neighborhood, I call it Waveless Wednesday. It just, I don't know if there should be a study. Like maybe it's just by the middle of the week, people are just like, just at, and I like, they will not wave on Wednesdays. Fridays were good. Mondays were good, but man.
My neighbor is moving, and I was on a run this morning, and he stopped me. He's like, I'm done. We sold the house. And so I talked to him for like 5 minutes afterwards. I try to talk to as many neighbors as possible. He's about a street. He's actually on that river, that flooding suit that I was talking about. And I don't even know his name. It doesn't matter. But if we see each other, like we'll talk, and it's cool to hear his stories. And we've had black bears in the neighborhood recently, and so he was a little tell me about that. So it's amazing what can happen when you just say hey.
Well, and it's amazing too when you get when you walk your dog in the neighborhood. I mean, like that is the key to like knowing everybody. I mean, talk about really expanding your network.
Yeah. What you've just described is like one of my favorite things from the Rick Rubin's book, which is The Universe Never Explains Why. So, like there was something inside of you that made you not want to talk to Decker, but you were still meant to meet him. That was still meant to happen. The universe saw that and then made it so that he initiated that, right?
Yeah.
But it was definitely meant to happen. We don't know why it was.
Well, dude, I'm a big believer in the whole frequencies that people put off, man. And I think that like frequencies, they're attracted to each other, and the opposite holds true as well.
The creative act of a way of being that.
The creative act, a way of being. There's a part in it where
it's got a lot of ratings.
Dude, it's great. It's a great book for creatives, in my opinion. It's really vague. It's kind of like a Tao almost, like the Tao of Rick Rubin, if you will. So there's a part in it where he talks about like, what if you read classic literature every day instead of reading the news for a year? Like, how would your perspective change, right? How would you approach things differently? How would you see things differently? So I took that to heart, and last year, instead of reading the news, which I used to do, multiple papers and all of that, I read Rick Rubin's book every month. I read it 12 times last year. I didn't read the news at all. I mean, I'd catch the headlines and things. I didn't completely disconnect, but that was it. Like it every time I read it, there was something else that jumped out. Like whether it's where you are, like working on a specific project or feeling stuck or anything, just really kind of big picture, abstract like advice. And that just, there's something there that's connected with me, and maybe it's my readings of a lot of the things that I feel get referenced into it, like I said, like the Tao. So I don't know, but I've really enjoyed that, and that's one of the few books that I buy for people and give as gifts, because it's hard to give people books as gifts.
I think that's an interesting thought. Like people say, like, what's your favorite book? And I think there's a different aspect of that. It's like, what's your favorite book to buy someone else? Those actually happen to be the same thing for me, but it is interesting how like there's a difference too. Like, is your favorite movie the best movie you've ever seen? Right. And so there's like so I'm excited. I'm gonna buy this book today, but it's and I'm actually I'm not gonna listen to it. I'm gonna actually read it.
Well, here's the thing
for you.
That I've heard,
so now I should listen to it? No.
I haven't listened to it, but I've heard that it's great to listen to because Rick reads it. And if you've listened to his podcast at all, it's a very soothing, calming thing. His voice is. And so I have heard it's good to listen to. He does different like chimes and things. Yeah.
Right.
Authors have to narrate their books. As a guy who's written 2 books myself, there's no way I would never voice that. And I don't understand why people don't. It's like, I can go on these tangents. I do go on these tangents with them because it's like, oh, this, let's go a little deeper in this. And I just think it's important. So maybe I won't buy it maybe I will buy the audio instead, but I like to read like 3 books a year, physical, a lot more audioed.
Cool.
I'll have to re-listen to it because I do have it.
Oh, you've listened to it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
He's a wrestling fan too, by the way. So,
huge wrestling fan.
Yeah.
He references that constantly in his podcast too.
All right. Well, there you go. Nate, this has been great. Anything we haven't talked about that you want to talk about?
I don't know. Not really. I think we kind of hit on a lot of fun stuff for me, and cool. I appreciate jumping in here and getting to know you guys, and hope to see you around Assembly. I feel like I've seen Tim before.
Now that I know where you hang, I know where to look.
Yeah, we're up here. We hide out in the corner in Grove's office at some of their empty desks, and we do a lot of projects with WPA, who are architects in the
They just won a big award through Fast Company too. So
cool. So we've been working with them a lot. That's been a great relationship to build. That's really happened because of Assembly.
Mel was one of the
being on our own.
Mel Price was one of. She was a judge at the original Start Norfolk, which is an event that I hosted back in 2011, like Build a Company in a Weekend competition. And she was, so I've known her for almost 12, 13 years now. She was real. They were real OGs back then, right? Just getting started. So to see where they've come, I don't know if you ever met any of those guys, Tim, but guys and gals, but rock stars. And it's cool to see you guys are working together too.
They're awesome. Mel's one of our biggest cheerleaders, and I've been trying to work with WPA for years, and they had no interest in working with the civil engineering firm where I was, and it was made very clear that they were not interested in that. And less than a year of starting Orbis, Mel called us to do her personal residence, so we assumed that was kind of like the test, to get started, and we've built a really great relationship with them, and they're some of the people that inspire us the most too.
I expect this question that Tim's going to ask you to have a phenomenal answer. I just want to put that caveat
I mean,
there.
You're definitely super ingrained in the region, and you know it really, really well. So, last question with every show that we do, is there a food of the region, or if you were to have guests from out of town come, where is the place, the restaurant that you would take them?
Oh man, can I give you two? Can we do like lunch and dinner?
Sure.
Right. All right, dude. Lunch, we're going to Yorkie's, and just opened in the Vibe District. Chef Kip Pool. Think of like a modern deli. He's got some name for it, some type of deli, but just elevating the sandwich experience. But also doing like community events. He hosts art shows. He hosts. They have like DJ nights. Just really like rethinking all in all what like a sandwich shop is, what a restaurant is, but the sandwiches are incredible. For me, I'm gonna eat that at lunch, and I'm probably not gonna eat dinner. Big fat, big sandwiches. And he's just an incredible human being as well. He's one of my oldest friends from college, so maybe there's a little bias, but he's doing it right.
Oh, sesame seed rolls too. Oh, these look amazing, Tim.
Oh, dude, they've got their own baker. They're making their own bread. Like, he hired a guy who has his own company called Pilgrim Bread, Tyler. They're doing so many things right at Yorkie's. And then if we're talking dinner, we're going to do Codex, which is here on Grammy Street, right across from Assembly. Ian is killing it. He does Chef Ian Hawk. He's just really, really seasonal based. He's got his traditional things he does that he keeps on the menu, but he also has a lot of evolving things. But man, it's hard to just pick. Man, we have so many good places to choose from, and like it's really like, what are you in the mood for? There's Blanca, which is kind of like French inspired. There's Le Grand Kitchen, which is just everything there is awesome. Toast and all of that stuff that they're doing, Handsome Biscuit. for more of like the quicker things. So like I look at it as like it's hard to pick. It's really hard to pick.
That's cool. Cool perspective. I dig.
Yorkies looks badass. I'm excited to check that out. I'm a big sandwich guy. I love a good sandwich. So yes. Last week we heard about this place called High Street Pizza. Tim and I are actually going to meet. We're gonna be there. I'm excited to check that out. They're only doing lunch on a Thursday and Friday apparently, so that's cool.
That's Tim Kenrick, and
okay.
His younger brother and I went to high school together. And I've known them for a long time. And before he opened High Street Pizza, we would all get together pre-pandemic to watch Tottenham Premier League games Saturday and Sunday mornings, and he would make us just like these killer breakfasts and just different things like that. Man, High Street Pizza, you cannot go wrong.
Is Codex the old field guide?
Yeah, he's in the old field guide, but when he opened originally, he was in Pendulum. So like he yeah,
interesting.
Which is where Alkaline started as well. It's the ramen spot over on 21st Street. So,
Pendulum is the meat house, basically.
Yeah, like the butcher shop. And they do their own great lunches, man. Their lunches are really good. Sandwiches and burgers.
Yeah. Well, this was, we have heard Codex before, so a little disappointed with that answer, Nate. Whatever. Just kidding. But Yorkies, bias or not, still open the door for a new shop that might check out by myself, maybe with Tim, maybe with my wife, who knows? But we appreciate the knowledge bomb of that. So
yeah.
Oh yeah. Cool.
Well, thanks.
This has been fun.
Thanks so much, Nate. We really we appreciate it.
Yeah, me too. I had a blast.
Yeah, for everyone watching and listening, like, comment, subscribe, share, all that stuff. Help people like Nate share their story. And thanks for watching, everyone.
Peace.